Welcome back to Blind Life Talks. It's been a while, hasn't it? So I'm Pranav, aka Phoenix, and a quick word about myself. I'm a 16-year-old student from Bangalore, India, studying in the 11th grade, and I am also a passionate coder. And I've got my regular friend with me, Abhishek Dhol. Hey, Abhishek.
Hey Pranav, great to be back on the show. Thanks for
Mhm.
having me again.
If you want to know more about us, I would really highly recommend you watch some of our previous Blind Life Talks episodes.
Yeah,
And they can be found. There is a Blind Life Talks playlist that we've compiled on the Tech with Phoenix YouTube channel. That's my channel, and I would also really highly recommend you subscribe to that as well. Some fun content that's coming your way. So that's my pitch done with. And
but
also the blind. Go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
in case you don't have time for that, just as Pranav quickly introduced himself, I will also introduce myself in a maximum of 30 seconds. So I am a 19-year-old a second year law student at Queen Mary University of London. I live in London, England, United Kingdom. I like Pranav. I did my schooling in India, but then came to Britain to go for law school. I'm also as part of my law school, I'm on the leadership committee of one of our most of my law school's most famous student clubs, the Queen Mary Commercial Awareness Society. If you want to look us up, you can find us on LinkedIn and on Instagram. Um, so yeah, that's who I am.
And I will put links to those in the description for y'all.
Yeah.
So you can find that. So both of our pitches in. Uh, well, we will go into what we're talking about today, but I want to address an elephant in the room here. Why are we dressed so formally? So
Yes.
let me, well, for those who cannot see what we're dressed as, Abhishek, you want to describe what you're wearing?
Yeah. So I am wearing a white formal shirt along um with black trousers, black socks, and black shoes. Um so yeah, that's what I'm wearing.
Okay. I am wearing a checkered brown and cream shirt, formal shirt, with beige trousers and black socks. Um, and why are we wearing this, Abhishek? You
Yeah.
actually, this was your suggestion, so you should take this up.
Yes, yes. We are actually wearing it for we're wearing this specific combination for a slightly sad reason.
Hmm.
This has we this has not been a very good year um for kind of figures or people who were great advocates in the blind community or for the rights of the blind. We have lost two great leaders in um, in the blind advocacy movement this year, who were who many would have regarded as civil rights leaders for the blind. On the one hand, we have most recently lost Scott Charles LaBar, a United States lawyer, was the who a few years ago was the president of the Colorado branch of the National Federation of the Blind, which is basically think of the NFB as the uh, American Civil Liberties Union for blind people in the US. Labar was the general counsel for the NFB and was regarded by many upcoming blind lawyers as a mentor and personal friend, as is evidenced by the many tributes to him that are to be found on the NFB's website and on an NFB mailing list called Blind Law, which I'm a part of. Um, and and he was also responsible for many substantial achievements both domestically and internationally. Most significant among them, the propagation and the signing of the propagation, signing, and ratifying of the Marrakesh Treaty on accessible books,
Hmm.
signed in Morocco, I believe, which basically internationalized the obligation to make books in accessible formats for people with print disabilities, including visual impairment. Um, on the other hand, we have lost another blind lawyer in the UK, um, Jeremy Brown, who was a famous family law solicitor, partner of a high street firm in London, and a partner in a high street firm in London, and the one of the founding members of the UK Society of Visually Impaired Lawyers, SOVIL. His loss is as great in or has caused immense sadness in the UK, just as Labar's caused in the US, with many people on the equivalent of the blind law mailing list in the UK, including young paralegals just out of university, testifying to how much generosity and time Jeremy was willing to give up for young lawyers who were up and coming in the profession. Not only did Jeremy encourage people to get into law, visually impaired people to get into law, he also in uh, attempted successfully to widen the UK Sovel membership to include
Hmm.
foreign legal practitioners who may not have the equivalent of who may not have equivalent support groups such as blind law or Sovel in their own countries. I
Oh,
have come across evidence of this personally from having met lawyers from countries including Saudi Arabia and Kuwait who have benefited from Sobel mentoring. In honor of these two great advocates for the blind, uh, we will we will devote 1 minute of our Blind Life Talks video today to devote a moment of, to give them a moment of silence.
yeah.
I think we can continue.
All
Um,
right, thanks.
yeah.
Um,
I just remember that I forgot to mention the specific reason why we're not exactly dressed up in uh, all black as you might expect to honor such a sad to mark such a sad occasion. It's just the only reason we're doing it is actually out of respect for one of the blind lawyers in question, Jeremy Brown, who to the end of his days had a spectrum of color, an interest in the spectrum of colors. Indeed,
mhm.
his wife, his widow, in her final email to the members of the Society of Visually Impaired Lawyers, of which I'm a student member, in which she invited um, um, you British visually impaired lawyers to his funeral, specifically asked that we don't wear black, but instead wear colored clothing. So to kind of
Right.
balance the taste, to kind of balance the require the what would have been appropriate for Labar and Brown, we have worn slightly different clothing.
Which honestly, which is a very interesting but also a very noble take on the entire thing. And thanks, Abhishek. You have explained that really well, actually. Thank you so much for that.
So
Um, and I'm not going to be on the mic for Uh, well, I'm going to pass the mic over to you again because moving on into our Blind Life Talks episode today, we've another wonderful one lined up for y'all, full of discussions and hopefully a lot of takeaways. And today's topic is something again a very is one that's very interesting and one that we felt motivated to make a Blind Life Talks video on after experiences or after seeing events take place around in our own daily lives. Abhishek, you want to take the intro up?
Yes, of course.
All right, cool.
Thanks. So the topic we're going to be discussing today is disability advocacy. On the one hand, starting with self advocacy and broadening out to advocacy for the disability community, or a specific community of some disabled people more generally. We will, because we are both visually impaired, we will be drawing many of our examples from experiences related to blindness. But let this please not be an indication that but please do not take this as an indication that we regard experiences of other disabilities as invalid or not worthy of consideration. We
Oh,
will attempt,
absolutely.
we will attempt where possible to draw from examples relating to other disabilities, but you may find that our examples or instances or illustrations of various concepts has a bit of a blindness hegemony to it.
Hmm.
At the same time, we hope, while this is the case, we hope that um, people with other circumstances may be able to glean something useful from this video.
Yeah, and usually I mention this at the end, but I feel compelled to put it here. Um, People in other circles other than the blindness and visually impaired communities can feel free to actually chime in the comment section or on Twitter, tagging, mentioning us and stuff about other, other aspects that we may have missed out on that are more useful to them in terms of advocacy. And we'd love to hear from you guys. So you can please let this not be a sort of let this not be a sort of way for us to say to lower your voice. In fact, let it be in the contrary. So if you do feel like there's something that we glossed over or there's something that you found useful, feel free to write to us or in the comments or what have you.
Yeah. Another caveat that I'll add about this video is that it's is that advocacy is supposed to be, especially self-advocacy, is supposed to be a skill that is taught over a long period of time to disabled people, in training them on how to be as independent as possible. However,
Hmm.
unlike some other skills, um, especially in some countries like India, for example, where the disability rights regimes in the legal context are not as robust as in the West. Advocacy is not given as much importance as it should be. And I know this personally from not having been uh, taught to do it in being while when receiving classes on blindness skills, such as how to read Braille or how to use a white cane to walk independently. So this video is our very modest attempt at filling a gap which blindness and other disability professionals should ideally be trying to fill with kids from about the ages of 8 to 17. So there is a lot we may not be able to cover inadequate detail, or a lot that we might gloss over.
Yep, you're right. You're right there. And all right, so with that, I guess we can begin. Do we want to do this the formal way, define advocacy, and then move on to?
Yeah, I think we should start with, yeah, we should more than a formal, we should start with the very basics of what is
Yes,
like what is advocacy. So um advocacy, I would say my definition is it is the action of um speaking up for your own rights, for the rights and needs of for the rights, needs, and principles that allow, on the one hand, you, and on the other, a wider community of people to live in to live with equality, equity, and fairness, and with freedom from discrimination in a world rife with inequality, unfairness, and a whole lot of discrimination.
that's actually precisely that's honestly better than I could have defined it myself. Now, I do want to caveat this by saying that your definition, your as the viewer's definition, might
Maybe
slightly
completely
differ.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
completely. And let that not deter you. That's completely okay. The advocacy to everyone who is indulging in it, or
oh, sorry, I
in
would
any
say
way.
engaging in it.
Sorry,
Indulging
sorry.
is, yeah.
Apologies. Yeah, to anyone who's engaging in it, may mean something different, and that is completely okay. Uh, I also do want to add that, at least to the both of us, advocacy does not include going out and beating people up for inequality at the
Yeah,
very beginning. So
we do not endorse violent or any other illegal means of doing things at all.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. All right. So with that down, where do we go next? Uh,
I
we
think
want to,
we, yeah, I think,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think advocacy in and of itself is, mm, um, based on like some differing conceptions here and there,
exactly.
reasonably easy to understand. The concept in and of itself is easy to understand, but the problem comes in with how do you apply the concept, and how do you ensure that your application of it is good. So I think uh, the the larger part of this video should be devoted to a discussion of that, and of perhaps tips or
On
advice on how to apply this concept.
Right. So, well, to begin with, as Abhishek's definition stated, advocacy can be for yourself, for your own personal needs. It can be for the needs of a larger community, or it can be for both. In some cases, such as well, in many cases, what inevitably happens, according to my own experiences, such as the one where Abhishek and I had um, not Abhishek and I had accessibility problems with two different airlines inside two different domestic airlines in India. It can start out as advocacy for self advocacy, but then it can also have the motives for a broader community. So
Yes.
it can be both, and as I said, self advocacy can really turn into advocacy for the community, um, and that is what happens in many cases, actually, according to what I've experienced.
Yeah, that's exactly the case, and this doesn't just apply to advocacy against discrimination based on various protected characteristics such as disability or race. It can even apply in other contexts such as environmental activism, or speaking out uh, against, for example, colonial oppression. Because
Yep.
where does it start? It starts with the with think about it from a practical perspective. Look at the ongoing protests in Iran, for example.
Yep.
Where does it start? It starts with a woman who uh, um, is way too who is finally reached her tolerance limit of being stamped on by a repressive government, and who says, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. And that kind of branches out into the all-consuming protests that are taking place there right now.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you just look at protests generally, the people who join a protest or who take part in one really do that because they are compelled to, either after one or two certain events or a limited number of events that really push them over the edge, or after a continuous undesirable feeling that they have been, going through. So it really starts from every single person in of themselves, and then it joins to become really a huge community. um so that is, I guess, that's, I guess, the sort of the base of the base of advocacy. And really, what are the main types of advocacy that exist? Do we want to go into methods, or do we want to talk a little bit about other stuff before we go into the methods of advocacy here?
I think methods comes is I would say method comes at the end, and first we need to
Fair
talk
point.
about
Yeah, yeah.
how do we like how do we conceptually apply it before actually getting into applying it itself. So
Right.
yeah, I think yeah, I think my first kind of um tip or piece of advice regarding advocacy is um, on a specific level for yourself, um, and more generally, think carefully about um, what what do you regard to be an inclusive, normal practice or
Yes.
behavior or custom or whatever, and what is exclusive, unkind, or discriminatory. And I would say that in this, you should um, you should learn how to you should not hesitate to be kind to yourself. This is a mistake that I really made quite a lot when I used to live in India, because Pranav earlier mentioned the ableist behavior we encountered from airline staff. I had become numb to it after a point, assuming that this is just how things were and this was just the norm. Um, you, I think, if you want to engage in advocacy, you need to tell yourself it starts by you telling yourself that this is that a word that a norm or a practice that that alienates or excludes me and people like me is not right, is not
Yes.
correct.
And don't hesitate to or I would say, don't well, don't hesitate to blame, or rather, um or rather put,
Call out.
rather than, yes, call out others for this sort of a problem, like as Abhishek said. And this is something I have gone through as well, where I was also numb to such exclusive acts, because I thought that that was just the norm. but in reality, it was actually someone needed a calling out here, because this is far from what is supposed to be the norm. And so don't hesitate to call someone out. That's really where advocacy actually begins, because if you repress that, and if you just decide to call it the norm, when something inside of you knows it isn't, then you're sort of really, you are well, you're sort of going hard on yourself rather than actually being able to then call someone out and shed light on a situation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I've just been thinking that our sort of discussion of how to apply the concept and methods can go together. So I would say that uh, use whatever tools and skills you have
Yep.
to to advocate either for yourself or for um, or for the community at large. If you're if you're good at if you're good at public speaking, arrange a gathering. Go to a park, stand on a lectern and speak. If you're good at social media shaming,
Do
effectively
that.
being a troll, then as John Oliver, the comedian, once advocated in a very limited context, go and troll those who are discriminating against you, lightly, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, or if you're good at if you're a good artist, then create paintings or whatever. And if you're a good writer,
Then right.
then submit an opinion column to the to the Times of London or whatever. There's no problem.
And one thing I would like to add here is, don't be afraid about, don't be it might look daunting at first hearing the word advocacy, and from what I've heard of, like, from other people, that sort of creates a very ginormous image, an image of a very large undertaking,
Yes.
and something that would be really, really difficult. In practice, it's actually become a little easier in today's time because of the presence of the internet and social media.
Yes.
And so don't be deterred, or don't be afraid uh, by hearing this huge word, what is it, 8-letter word,
Yeah.
um, that has been in some cases by some people blown out of proportion. Um, don't be afraid of starting out thinking that you might not be able to effectively convey what you're thinking, or others might not agree with you, or you don't know where to start. Just go with, I guess the most as cliche as it sounds, go with your gut and go with what you feel is the best way to start. And remember that there's no right and wrong in advocacy, because as we alluded to earlier, everyone has their own definition of advocacy, and thus everyone has their own way or methods of advocating for something, and that's completely okay. So
Yeah.
we have actually said this in a few blind life talks before as well, but don't be afraid to raise your voice out in any medium, because just either considering what people might say, or being deterred by the thought that it might be a lot of work and it might eat up a lot of time. Um, Seriously, honestly, considering it doesn't, and the advantage of the internet means that you can actually come out and state your opinions, in a civil manner, of course, but freely.
My follow-on point from that would be that um on you should not think that you are too insignificant a person to voice a concern. Um,
Yep.
that is that's often a myth that is kind of put out there about oh, I'm too small a fry, there will no one in power will listen to me. You are a human person who's affected by certain things. Just voice it. Of course, we should be realistic and point out that for some people to use to kind of you have access to megaphones to advocate for themselves, metaphorically, megaphones to advocate for themselves is easier than for others.
Yes.
I won't deny, for example, that for me as a visually impaired Indian at without seeming to boast, at one of the world's top 30 law schools, I can speak about. I'm more likely to be heard when I speak about certain issues than that impact blind people in India than somebody in a rural village in Rajasthan
Yeah.
who who may not know English. So that is, of course, that realistic thing is there, but just because that is the case doesn't make your perspective any less valid or you not worth hearing or whatever. Um, on the other hand, I would also say that uh, 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 you have to be realistic and face up to the fact that when you are in a position where self advocacy is especially something which is very relevant to you. For example, you have a disability or are from some other minoritized background. You The way the world works today, I think, still means that you would have to you'd have to perhaps work a little harder than people without your protected characteristic to get to a certain position of privilege. So I would
Yes.
always, so I am a very, very great advocate for, well, a very great proponent of upskilling and of hard work and of trying to lift yourself to a better position
Likewise.
in life. So
Yeah.
if you are a so if you are, for example, a blind person at one of the national law schools and are having to run from pillar to post to get even the most basic of your needs met, such as having material your reading materials in a format that you can access, uh, um, work do the work that it takes, even though it may be 6 7 times harder, and try to try to get something such as the Rhodes Scholarship to go to Oxford, for example, where you would have where A, you'd have access to lots better resources, and B, you would be in a more influential position to to have yourself heard. So don't
Absolutely.
so on the one hand, if you're not in an influential position, that doesn't mean that you cannot or should not be heard. But on the other, there is no reason why you should not, there is almost no reason why you should not try to get to a position of influence if you can.
The other point that just stemmed my brain right now um, is this: just like your own influence, never be deterred by the thought that what you're advocating for is an insignificant problem,
Yes.
because it's not. I want to. The thing is, pro- every single problem that you face, and if solved, would help you do what you do best better and more efficiently. And so there is no reason for anyone to tell you that it is not a significant enough problem to advocate for. I want to give you a very simple example. This didn't require a lot of advocacy from my end, but it did require some asking. When I wrote my midterm exams, and because I'm in the 11th grade now, there's actually really no subject where I require a scribe. I actually just type everything out now. Um, the one for me, the one problem that I faced was that the table that I was writing at was it was not comfortable to type on because my hand it was in the shape of I'm for computer science and physics nerds, sorry, students, it's gonna be an in the shape of an OR gate, an OR logic gate, which for those unaware is a D, but except that a print D, except where in a print D you have a straight line and then a curve going from the top of the line to the bottom. In this shape that I'm mentioning, you have a curve, but then instead of a straight line, you sort of have another triangle going into that curve. So it's like two curves, one inside the other, but they're not touching and they're sort of spaced out a little. And this table was in that shape, which obviously meant that my arms and my hands, well, my arms mostly actually were pressed against the edge of the table, causing a real gash actually on my forearm to form when I when I typed for long hours. And you got to understand that the exams that I'm writing, for example, my economics paper one, which is a theory written paper, and including my extra time, which I absolutely require considering that there are diagrams that I have to describe and stuff, is 4 hours. So when you realize that I have to type for 4 hours. Or to give you another example, when I wrote my SAT, I had to sit there for nearly 5.5 hours on the first day because the SAT is a timed examination and I cannot leave.
Mm.
Well, I got breaks, but only for like 5 to 10 minutes in between. These tables actually start to become a huge problem. It actually hinders my capability to write my answers, and this is something that I asked for. And in fact, my fellow peers did tell me that it just sounded like such an insignificant problem. But when you really take it, when you really sort of draw the problem out and think about it and its implication, any problem can actually create a significant impact on what you're doing. It may not be direct, but it may not be completely direct, but it does create an impact. And so it does warrant um, it does warrant an opportunity for advocacy, and it does warrant a solution.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Thank you for that very excellent point. And I actually had a similar difficulty, though in my when I was at school, though in my case, that it was a problem with the height of the table rather than
Oh,
yeah,
I faced it.
so ergonomic issue. But yeah, I would add to that point by saying that, in addition, don't think that certain um, uh, uh, don't let people who don't understand your experience dictate to you about what spaces, occasions, forums, networks, etc., are appropriate to discuss something on or not, or are appropriate for the discussion of your problems or not. It's these are some one very commonly put out trope of this kind is that use for certain for disability advocacy kind of things, use other use social media platforms other than LinkedIn. Keep LinkedIn for purely professional stuff.
Yeah,
um Now that has a it's a that's a very dangerous kind of doctrine to put about, because that is the equivalent of a US constitutional law doctrine that was in place, that the Supreme Court created in the late 19th century and which was repealed in the mid 20th century, which was called separate but equal, which allowed for segregated schools and segregated railway cars. Um, so
Yes.
effectively, what such tropes do is take these things, take discussions of these problems, which should very much be in the mainstream, out of the mainstream.
Yeah.
And you need to kind of guard yourself against that. And you may get influenced by such a mentality in indirectly, not just directly. For example, the mentality that made me believe for a time that LinkedIn was not a good space for, was not the best place for disability advocacy, was um, when I used to when I had gone to attend a Model United Nations conference in Delhi at a school which shall remain nameless for the purposes of this video. My mom had accompanied me because um, my school had asked her to accompany me, and she before, while we were going into the school, which was like a very formalized kind of environment where everyone was in shirts and ties and blazers and stuff, she and I was the only blind person there. She told me, fold your cane up. So for those who are unaware, the many of the canes that blind people walk with, which are sticks with rolling tips at the bottom, which help us figure out obstacles,
Yeah.
they are disassemblable. So you can disassemble them and fold them into a and fold them when not using them, and ensure that the joints of the stick remain folded together by putting a rubber band around them, or by putting a specific type of elastic band around them,
Elastic.
which comes with the
Yeah.
cane. So my mom told me to do that to my cane, because she didn't want sighted people staring in that strange school, staring and asking questions. Um, so these, so a mentality like this, you can be influenced by it through something completely different and separate from what from like you don't necessarily have to be told that this is not an appropriate space for this or something like that. You can even have an experience like what I did and then extrapolate it in your head to that. And that, I would say, is something to be very careful of and to watch out for and to prevent happening to you at all costs.
Absolutely. The number of times that people have told me in a certain Reddit forum, for example, which was still sort of related to what I was talking about, that it was not the best place to talk about things, and shunned me away, not very nicely, have been more than I can count on my fingers. So it is it is a common problem, and it is one that many people trip over. So you'd want to watch out for that. And while we're talking about deterrence, one that I want to talk about is something that I haven't really heard mentioned as much generally, but I think is still very important. What I've witnessed a lot is people either refusing to start advocating for a problem, or stopping in the middle, because they realize that they don't really have any support from a group that they thought would help them. um,
Yes,
and that's really important because it is a huge deterrent. It's a psychological thing that when you feel alone, you start losing the motivation to do something. um because the main reason that I have seen this happen is that people feel like it goes back to the point where people feel their problem is not really significant. um and that is just not the case. There will be someone who agrees with you, and you just have to find that person. because there are like what 8 billion people in the world today, uh, and there has to be someone who has either the same or a similar problem. And even if not, every person is different, and every person has their own has their own requirements and their own accommodations and their own problems. And that the fact that someone is not willing to join up or link up with you when advocating, it should not really be a demotivating factor for you. Um, to really put this in perspective, there have been a few times where Abhishek and I have been really the only ones advocating for something, and it takes us a while, and then slowly we start bringing in like-minded people. We don't start out with a huge group of people that we wait on collecting. And while we're at it, the other thing that I also want to mention here, because we talked about having a group that you might think of, is don't really be afraid if you aren't able to plan your advocacy sort of journey completely. uh, we seldom do. We just plan
Go
out the
with the flow.
start. You just go with the flow. Exactly. Things may pan out completely differently, and the more important thing than planning your agenda out is to know what you're advocating for, and to embrace the fact that it's going that it may change. I want to give an example right here. I don't remember the exact specific timeline, but going back to that incident where Abhishek was and I were Abhishek was not really treated well on an airline, and I had similar problems. We actually began by planning out a short that we would upload on this very YouTube channel about this. It would be a 1 minute short. But then a series of events, Abhishek, if you remember these, you could
Yes.
shed some light on them. A series of events took place, and we realized that
Which
rather than making.
transformed that short into our very first Blind Life Talks video.
Exactly. And those events took place in the span of what? Two
A
days?
week.
Okay, a week. Yeah.
Yeah.
A week. And so that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah, no, I don't know how relevant talking about those specific events will be, but I will just mention them for what they're worth. And you can, to know the full context, you can watch our first Blind Life Talks video.
Yeah.
Um, so basically what happened was that, so we actually encountered some problems making that short because Pranav's some of Pranav's technical equipment
Oh
crashed at the
yes.
time,
I think I
and
fried an SD
yeah,
card.
yes, I believe so, and yeah, some you can argue about that being providence or whatever at work, and that's fine. I don't have views on that. But yeah, other than that, we were like kind of um I was doing my best to chase the airline as much as I could, to kind of respond to my complaint because they were doing their best to ignore me after giving an initial kind of pro forma statement that uh that did its that did its best to sort of uh not go into the path of invalidating my experience of ableism while attempting to avoid all responsibility for it.
Yep.
And then yeah, just I think the day before we made the video, I received basically basically a non-apology from the airline in question, which suggested that which I basically consider to be a non-apology for various reasons, but which uh, called my experience of ableism an inconvenience,
Yeah.
which is obviously logically absurd for various reasons, and which suggested a solution for to avoid such things in the future that would have put a disproportionate burden on me in terms of the amount of pre travel work that I would have to do. For those who live in Britain or who are aware of the cultural context, it was the communication, the so-called apology that I received from the airline in question was um, as good from their side as the so-called apology that the Sun newspaper published regarding the subject of their previous editorial decision of publishing an article by Jeremy Clarkson, where he said that he hated Meghan Markle so much that he wanted her stripped naked and people throwing excrement at her.
Oh, I've heard of
Um,
this.
yeah, you've heard of this one. Yeah, and
Yep.
they issued a forma apology, which most people do not believe to be an apology. So I received an equivalent of that from this Indian airline, and so yeah, and those kinds of things. So that is an illustration that you should take things take things in the flow a bit and go with go with how things go, and not necessarily just stick to a pre-formulated plan. But that, I would say, does should not discount the value of planning.
No,
Don't
not absolutely not. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
don't just randomly like don't kind of not plan, I would say.
Yeah.
But it's not, this is not, advocacy in some senses is not like an exam, is not like a history exam where the maxim of uh, you if you don't plan, you're planning to fail. It's not that. You can sometimes choose not to plan your next move or whatever. And as an example of this, is the very best example of this, I believe, is are many of the UK trade unions who, my God, are excellent at advocating for their workers' rights, and
Oh,
who use a mechanism of calling industrial action in the form of strikes to
yep.
yeah. And the best example, and I have personally experienced this, and painful experience this has been, in my after my first year of law school was over. Many of the examiners for the first year courses that I was taking belonged to the University and College Union, UCU, who are a trade union for university professors. And during the exam marking period, they went on strike. And this meant that the results um, for two out of the six exams that I'd taken in my first year were delayed by a month and a half because of their strike. Now, what this led to was, they the my uni had to kind of back down on its very recalcitrant, inflexible position of not raising staff pay, and and also to disclose certain information about a London specific payment allowance that kind of takes care of the higher cost of living in London, which is called the London waiting. If effectively what was happening was, the university was my uni was paying certain staff, uh, um, l- they should have been paying, if they had truly taken the London waiting into account, they should have been paying 500 pounds more, which is about 10,000 rupees more than what they were paying.
Whoops.
And so, yeah, I don't want to be talking trash about my uni, but anyway, that is the reality. And the thing is that the if you look at the statements of the UCU published on their website and on their Twitter, you will clearly see that they say, if employers come to the table, if they are willing to have a meaningful conversation about pensions, about working conditions, etc., we will call off the strike immediately.
Yep.
And
And
they clearly said that depending on what happens, we will move things accordingly. It's not like they said that we will conduct a boycott of exam scripts from June the 5th until August the 17th, and they stuck with that boycott, mm, like without any flexibility from June 5th to August the 17th. They could have carried on that boycott until October the 17th
yeah,
if the employers hadn't come to the table.
in
So
which
yeah.
case, a lot of it's probably not go there.
Yeah.
You'd have to miss a month of uni.
No, no, no. That didn't happen because what happened is that there were enough professors were not striking to mark 4 out of the 6 exams that we had taken. And so what that meant was that when you did when the administration did the averages and other pass grade calculations, they could determine from those 4 subjects itself if you were suitable to move on to the next year or not. So
Okay.
even if you did have, even if somebody did fail a subject or more than one subject, they could they were given an opportunity to reset it later. You actually have to do really badly to like miss the entire like month. You have to fail at least, you have to fail 2 courses, or perhaps 3, to have to redo a year, or to miss something like that. So it's
Whoop.
that wouldn't have been a problem. But anyway, um,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's an
So
illustration of that.
yeah, always no. The thing is, I guess the sort of final outcome of this particular point is always know what it's okay if you don't know what you probably are going to do next, especially if you're just stumped after some a certain set of events. But it's always good to have some sort of an outline on what your plan is, and this may include platforms that you might want to advocate use to advocate, and those also sort of while there is no hard and fast rule on which platform you can use, and you're certainly welcome to use whatever platform suits you best. um, it it does help to sort of at times consider the audiences that primarily use a platform to sort of make your advocacy a little more effective, in terms of, for example, the best example I can give of, if you're trying to reach like a corporation and stuff, Twitter actually works out um, quite well, because Twitter is the most direct way of access between uh, people with high influence and just normal users, because people such as governments and executives always, the one platform that they use, even though let's just say it's got its own fair share of controversy, is Twitter.
Yeah.
So it's always, at least from my experience, and this is something I learned over time, while uh, engaging in a multitude of advocacy projects. It's always it does help to know, or to sort of gauge which platform might be the most effective in terms of reaching the audience that you're trying to reach, or um, getting in contact with a certain person or firm that you're trying to establish contact with. So that doesn't mean you don't advocate on a certain platform. By all means you can. It just sort of helps you prioritize, and that's the entire thing, right? So you can plan out, have a general idea of what you're doing. Never try to be stumped as to what you're doing, but it's okay to not know what you have to do next, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
or to have slightly nebulous ideas about what to do next. So yeah, no, I have two follow-up points from that, but one one I will return to what you were saying previously about like how to kind of press on when you feel like you don't have support. um,
Yeah.
I would say that one of the most valuable pieces of advice which I had rejected when I was younger, but whose value I realized later, was was this thing about joining support groups of like-minded people. I was told by the closest thing I could get in an in India to a qualified teacher for the visually impaired to join to join tech discussion groups where I could kind of have conversations with people about various tech related problems for the blind. Now, at the time, I did not realize the value of this advice because I thought I was like, uh, as Hassan Minaj would say, I came in hot. I thought I could do stuff myself, entirely, like my own intellectual acumen and everything would be able to support me through whatever difficulties I encountered, and that the more independent I was, the better. But I would very, very highly encourage joining support groups, because since I only actually joined any proper support groups for the visually impaired since I came to the United Kingdom, which is when I joined the Society of Visually Impaired Lawyers and Blind Law, and those groups have helped me with everything from recommendations on cane tip brands um, to recommended books for obscure areas of law such as marine insurance. So
Yep.
definitely join a support group. Uh, um, ensure see the content of the group, see what people are talking about and how they're talking about it, and determine from that if it's the right group for you. And not only that,
Absolutely.
also participate in the group's discussions so that people get to know you, so that when the time comes, you have people who, um, at least there is a likelihood, will help you when you need it.
Yes. And one thing I want to add to this, I know you have another point, but I want to
Yes.
quickly add to this is never underestimate when advocating. As we talked about how at times when you don't have a group to help you, you can still continue. But when you do have a group to help you, never underestimate the importance of working with a team. Um, and never sort of never let the fact that you're trying to reach a huge sort of corporation or something let you down, especially with a team. I want to give an example
Yeah.
here, which Abhishek will know about
Mhm.
from and you can read about from my tweets, which is a few months ago, a certain dev by the name of Guide Dev, who he goes as Guide Dev
Yeah.
on the internet, who was supporting a certain accessibility mod for a video game which is not
Hearthstone.
accessible natively, called Hearthstone. Yep. And this was a huge thing because there were thousands of visually impaired players who got into the game thanks to Guide Dev, and who were taking part in tournaments with the site, with people who were not visually impaired, who were joining up with sighted creators on Twitch streams and stuff. So the sort of bridge that I like to refer to when comparing these the visually impaired community and the not currently visually impaired community, dissolved in this certain uh, aspect, or area. However, this mod was a huge undertaking because Hearthstone is a massive game. It's got over 20 million players, and it's a huge thing, and it keeps getting updated every week. And Guide Dev had also got he also had a full-time job. Um, and so he finally, in I believe it was November, decided to put his foot down, and he said, "Look, I cannot do this anymore because it's just draining me completely." And it was with good reason, because if you read his page on the process of updating the mod and patching the game, it can take anywhere between 1 to 20 working days. And while there were a lot of people that mentioned that, the game was dead, some of us, actually around 15 of us, thought that we could probably get Blizzard, the company behind Hearthstone, which is a huge company, by the way. Microsoft
Yes.
is trying to acquire them for 69 billion US dollars. So that should give you an idea of how big the company is. Um, this company, we had the idea of trying to get them to implement the accessibility part of it natively into the game, and it looked like a huge undertaking. But as we started getting more and more people, would you believe it, within a week, I think it was within a week, Blizzard finally responded saying that they were committed to making the game natively accessible. um, and uh, and they even started hiring past players who were using the mod, and who were into coding or into accessibility testing, to effectively help them write and test the native accessibility engine. So a team always helps. The saying "more the merrier" cannot be more true in this situation. So the thing that, as Abhishek said, about support groups, is that the more connections that you can form there, um the easier it becomes when you're actually trying to advocate for something, because you start getting a backbone to sort of help you.
Yeah, yeah. No, I will just say that thank you for bringing up that Hearthstone example. I think we will at a slightly later point we will return to it, and examine it through a slightly different lens. But
Hmm.
yeah, we I think my next point about, like, following on from what we were saying earlier about the use of platforms and understanding those platforms. I would say, like you had mentioned about understanding the audience of the platforms that you're using.
Yeah.
Um, I would also say that understand the kind of with some platforms come conventions of usage, such as, like, how you write, how much you write, what kind of things you include or not,
Yep.
or on social media there may be conventions surrounding memes and things like that. So
Hmm.
it is important to understand those conventions, because otherwise it may not be kind of it may be slightly harder for you to advocate. And I will give you an example, a historical example of this. And this is in relation to another very great advocate in the blind community, whom you and I have discussed very often, Avraham Rabby.
Yep.
Yep. Rabby, for those of you who are unaware, was the first blind diplomat to be recruited to the State Department, the US's foreign ministry. Um, I and we should appreciate this distinction, because we'll come back to it later, that uh, Rabi was not technically the US's first blind diplomat, because there was another person called Marianne Masterson who had gone blind after working in the State Department for a number of years. But Rabi was the first blind person to be recruited as a blind person to the State Department. Um, after doing his term in the foreign service, after working for about 18 years as an American diplomat, um, he retired and returned to the country of his birth, which was Israel. For those of you unaware of his story, um, he was born in the early 1940s, went blind at about the age of 10, and because Israel didn't have the resources to educate him, he was sent to England, to the Worcester School for the Blind Boys, to study, and after that went to Oxford. Um, after which time he went to where he earned a degree in French and Spanish, and after earning his degree, he went to the U.S. as a Fulbright scholar. Um, Earned an MBA at Chicago, and after working in human resources for about uh, 20 years or so, became a diplomat. Well, anyway,
Okay.
after retiring from the foreign service of the United States, Rabbi returned to Israel, and he was someone who advocated quite a lot even after retirement for people with disabilities. And on one occasion, he came across an article in the Sunday Times of London, which is part of the Times group of newspapers in the UK, which is a conservative media publication owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Yep.
Um, so this article in the Sunday Times, the newspaper is called. There are two newspapers technically: the Times, which is published on all weekdays, and the Sunday Times, which is published on Sundays. Now there
Yeah.
was this article on, I think, the February 8th, 2011 issue of the Sunday Times, very stupid article called "Blind People Taught to Quote Unquote See Like a Bat," written by
Oh,
a
I
guy
remember.
called written by a guy called Mark Macaskill. This was an article about how some blindness professionals and blind people in the US were teaching UK blindness organizations to use use echolocation, and basically training them on how to teach blind people to use echolocation as a method of mobility. Um, and so effectively, what McCaskill was saying is that because blind people can use echolocation, it's sort of the best substitute to seeing. And that obviously is very, very stupid. Now, Rabbi wrote a letter to the Sunday Times where which was actually not published by the Sunday Times, but which was published in the Braille Monitor, which is a magazine for the National Federation of the Blind. It is, if you wish to look up the article, which we will link, it is called a response to the Sunday Times. In this letter to the Sunday Times, because you can write, as readers of that newspaper, you can write letters to them. Rabbi made two very key mistakes. Um, One, he did not heed the kind of editorial advice on letter writing in terms of the word limits. The editors have been very clear for a number of years that um, anything far beyond 200 words may be difficult to include on the Times or Sunday Times letters page. Um,
Right.
I have counted the number of words in Rabbi's letter in a Word document, and it's 277.
Okay.
So that was a very key mistake. And the other one is that you begin I this has been a convention, I guess, depending on the gender of the editor in question, but you begin the letter to the editor as in the salutation. You don't begin it in the traditional way of "dear so and so." You just begin it very, very crisply by saying, "Sir, I think so and so," or whatever, however you like to begin a letter.
Okay.
But you basically begin it with the word "sir." Now, what Rabbi did is he wrote the salutation "Sir," comma, on one line, and began the text of the letter in the line below. Now,
Oh,
now what happens is in Times and Sunday Times letters, and we can link this up for you as well to help you see it. There are at least from what my screen reader shows me when I copy the text of the letters into a Word document, there is no blank line between the salutation and the start of the text. So
Oh,
yeah, so you may call this pedantic cherry picking or whatever, but those are two very clear stylistic conventions that Rabbi violated, and these are not things that a blind person um, kind of can be excused from violating,
not really.
because
No.
yeah, so yeah, pay attention to your um stylistic conventions and things like that. And I mean, if obviously there are um issues when it comes to there can be issues when it comes for a blind person to formatting something like a document very well. So don't hesitate to take help for this advocacy where needed.
Yeah,
Don't hesitate to work with other people to get something like this right.
absolutely. Again, going back to the point of connections. Um, and I think uh, the other thing, I mean, it's a very small point. It should already be known, but I just want to mention it right here. When you're um, mentioning facts or any numbers, please make sure that they are accurate. And the main reason for this is when you're advocating, you're going to have a lot of people
Yeah.
questioning your reasoning for something, or questioning the entire point of your advocacy. And you don't want to give them something that they can use to effectively shut down your entire advocacy movement, which can happen
Oh my
in
God.
some.
Sorry. I think there's can I just mute my mic? There's a fire alarm ringing in my building.
Oh, whoops.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. It
jeez.
was. Oh, I just realized today is a Thursday. They test the fire alarm in my building every Thursday. My
Oh,
sincerest apologies for that. It
jeez.
stopped ringing now. Sorry about that. Go on, go on.
The funny thing is we didn't hear it. So,
Yeah.
well, all right. As I was saying, the you don't want people who are questioning your movement to be able to shut it down based on the fact that your facts aren't straight, which can happen, by the way, in some drastic situations. um i I can't remember one, but I have heard of situations or witnessed them on Twitter where someone's movement, or whatever they've been advocating for, is completely shut down because um, people just abandon them after they realize the facts weren't straight. That's the last thing that you want.
Yeah. I would say, following on from that, also, I would say that you should. We've been talking a lot about not hesitating about various things, but we'll introduce a quick caveat into that, which is realize that these issues of discrimination can can sometimes be very nuanced and may not be as kind of black and white as you may think.
Yeah,
And it may not be that something as it is, to use that classic saying, things may not be as they seem. um and I'll use another, like, historical example from this, where I kind of will introduce a theory of my own at a point, but you'll see how it could be a logical theory. So again, and we uh, uh, um, um, I'm again going to use the example of Avraham Rabby. Um, you will remember when I was talking about him earlier that I mentioned that he was born in Israel and
yep.
retained his Israeli citizenship throughout his life, even though he lived in Britain and America for nearly 55 years. He at the time that he and the National Federation of the Blind were kind of advocating for the State Department to abandon a rule that had been written in the 1750s, forbidding the recruitment of disabled diplomats. Um, there were a lot of there were some public statements made by the State Department, particularly by a guy called George West, who I believe was the Director General of the State Department, saying, expressing skepticism. This was in the 1980s, early 1990s, so a while ago.
Right.
Um, uh, Expressing some skepticism about blind people's ability to do the job of a diplomat. But when you actually think about it, there is it seems to be a bit more complicated than that, because I mentioned that there was actually a blind diplomat serving in the State Department at the time Rabby was recruited, whose
Yep.
name was Mary Ann Masterson. And in fact, many FSOs, Foreign Service officers, who commented on who commented on Rabby's obituary in the Washington Post, because we unfortunately lost him during the COVID-19 pandemic, have spoken about Mary Ann Masterson as well, and how she used to go about she used to walk around the streets of Tokyo, Japan, with her guide dog. The thing is, at the shortly before, during the time that Rabi was attempting to uh, get recruited to the State Department, there were certain problems taking place between the United States and Israel. I don't know if you know, Pranav, but does the name Jonathan Pollard ring a bell in your mind?
Oh, I think it. Yeah, I think it does.
It does.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, he was the guy caught in the 1980s in naval intelligence, who was spying and giving information to an
Oh,
Israeli Air Force colonel.
yeah.
Um,
I know about you. I
yeah,
know about this now. Yep.
Jonathan Pollard. Yep. So the thing was, uh, Pollard was caught around the same time around the same time that Rabi was attempting to get into the foreign service.
Oh, this can be a
Now the
problem.
thing is, exactly. Now the thing is that many people in subsequent years have said, after Pollard was caught and arrested, he was given at the time a life sentence, though he was released in 2020 and now lives in Israel itself. Many people said later on that the sentence of life imprisonment given to Pollard was anti-Semitic in nature, and that the judge had been anti-Semitic. Now, tell me, when you have someone, and things were even more complicated. There was not just Pollard who was involved. There were the Israelis, after it came out, were very uncooperative and difficult, including by making the Americans translate various questions for Israeli officials into Hebrew when those specific officials could speak English perfectly. Um,
Jeez.
so yeah, and just as a quick note of interest for anyone who is a history buff or interested in intelligence matters, uh, our um the current Israeli ambassador in New Delhi, Naur Gilon, was one of the people that the FBI suspected and put surveillance on, as an official handling Pollard's product, as in the stuff that he was giving over to the Israelis.
Oh,
Though he was later cleared of all allegations, as in Jailon was later cleared of all allegations. Now, when you have such a big problem with Israel, um, how likely is it that you would give someone with a name like Avraham Rabby the almost the same level of security clearance that Jonathan Pollard would have been given?
Immediately and this happened at, well, nearly the same time.
Yes, because Rabby joined in 1990. He was sent as the Americans' political officer to London in 1990, June of 1990, I believe. So, like, the thing is that they publicly pretended as if they were skeptical of blindness and the ability of blind people to do these things. But uh, there is a phenomenon of people pretending to have a discriminatory mentality for other hidden agendas when they may not actually be discriminatory. So how do we know, is my question, that they weren't that they were trying to hide a level of anti-Semitism behind a layer of ableism?
Yeah, it's sort of the greater of two evils that you have to.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is not an unknown phenomenon. If you read about it, there are people who in countries such as England and the US, you have as a citizen, you are obligated to do, if you're summoned, to do this thing called jury duty, where you basically sit as part of a lay panel of 12 people to decide whether somebody who's tried for a crime has actually committed that crime or not. And jury duty can be a pretty stupid thing to do because it takes away from your working life and your personal life and everything. And there are rules surrounding quarantining of jurors during a trial and things like that. So it's not something that people like doing if it can be avoided. So especially because unfortunately there is an overrepresentation of ethnic minorities in both the British and American criminal justice systems. What people have picked up is this trick of pretending to be racist when they may not actually be racist.
Yeah,
And so yeah, that's something you can read about. And even as long ago as the 1970s, the first African person to go to Eton, a guy called Dilibe Onyema, wrote in his book, which is called Black Boy at Eton, whose Amazon page we'll link up, about how some people who engaged in racial bullying of him while he was at Eton did it just to impress so-called bigger bullies in the playground.
yeah.
So these things are complicated, is basically what I'll say.
And the problem here is, it's very hard to figure out when something like this is happening, and it's very easy to mistake one thing for another.
Exactly, exactly.
So you need to look at context. You need to look at, um, I guess, the background of someone saying something. I'm not saying that in every person you meet you need to do a thorough whitewash, clean sweep check on them. But in some cases it's always good to have some information on someone saying something. Things like platforms like Twitter actually allow you to see the history, the tweet history of someone. um, and that sort of course you shouldn't always just be basing your opinions on someone based on that, but it gives you an idea. It may give you some hint towards an idea for someone's actual motives for saying something.
Yeah, yeah. But that may not always be possible.
No,
For example, in the Rabi case, the State Department didn't exactly have a history of anti-Semitism which they could look into. So
exactly.
the NFB, when they fought it as a case of them being ableist. And as John Oliver, the comedian, says, when you pretend, uh, there's a very thin line between pretending to be racist, ableist, or whatever, and actually being that. So
Agreed.
even if the State Department was anti-Semitic, and not hiring Rabby because of that, uh, because they were pretending to be, because, but I wouldn't I wouldn't go so far as to pin myself down about this thing of whether they were pretending to be ableist or not, but uh, the fact that they were making ableist statements, regardless of whether they're anti-Semitic, I think allows for us to say, without being historically inaccurate, that the State Department in the 1980s and 1990s was ableist. Because, in my
Yeah,
opinion, at least, thinking that it's okay to to pretend to be something, or thinking that you can get away with pretending to be something, is almost as bad as actually being it.
exactly. And really, it wasn't for any better motive. Um, it was just because they were anti-Semitic, which was
They may have been. Remember, we don't know. We don't
they
know.
may have been
They may have
anti-Semitic.
been.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which, if it is true, um
horrible.
is horrible. As bad, if
Equally
not
horrible as if they had been ableist.
exactly. And so, yeah, that's actually a very valid point that you brought up. You really need to know well, it's very, as hard as it is important to know, or to gauge an understanding of the true motives of someone's actions. And let's face it, in many cases, and I would even say in probably around 80 to 90 of 100 cases, it's hard to do, and in some cases it might be impossible to do. um, and that's okay, because those are out of your control at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that follows on to the thing of, just because you usually advocate for a certain thing or a certain cause, doesn't mean that you should kind of not not do it for, not step in when other causes need help,
Yeah.
especially when, especially if you have the capacity to do so. Look at the NFB and its British equivalent, the Royal National Institute for Blind People, RNIB, as classic examples for this. When George Floyd was murdered in 2020, and
Yeah.
the West had to go through a pretty big period of racial reckoning. Both NFB and RNIB made it quite clear that they stood alongside those advocating for racial justice. Um,
Yes.
so definitely do not um, distance yourself from other causes just because you are advocating for one particular cause. It's a
Yeah.
mistake. It's a mistake that people have made in the past. For example, Emmeline Pankhurst and the suffragettes in the early
Yes.
20th century distanced themselves from freedom fighters in India. We don't
Yes.
want to make those kinds of mistakes.
Not at all. And oh shoot, there was another. Yeah, the example that I was gonna say. Another one is the way that many organizations have treated the Ukraine war. Um, One example that I wanted, I mean, okay, so this may there are justifications for how some organizations might say that it's related, but many tech uh, firms, or even many non-profits, who are not really related to this, who are not really related to foreign affairs or the war itself, have contributed funds, or have sanctioned or blocked services in Russia in an effort to bring the war to an end on the
Yeah.
favorable side.
Yeah, to have justice for the Ukrainians.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the sort of last point that I would want to mention here, which I have, is it's a very is one that we talked about at the start. and again, this is probably one that's probably implied, but I would like to just put it in as well, while we're at it. Please stick to certain moral values when you're advocating. Um, Mahatma Gandhi, or Gandhiji, as we say, he advocated for free. Well, he was a freedom fighter, and he advocated for the removal of the British, but he didn't turn to violence. And yeah, please don't cause a stampede, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Or in some cases, which actually has happened. And I again, I can't really, I wish I could give you an example to quote, but I can't. In some cases, it can also happen that while advocating for something, you accidentally um, are are um are not fair, or you accidentally discriminate something or someone, or some other community that you didn't intend to. And that is something that you'd want to watch out for, especially in the statements
Yes.
that you write, speak, or sort of put out in any way. um, I'm not saying that, this is not to say that you shouldn't be firm. You should absolutely be firm. And the example that I want to give for this is actually, when this certain airline that Abhishek had trouble with in June. Um, well, just a month or two ago, um, one of my friends was flying back for the first time. Well, she was flying alone. She's blind, and she was flying alone for the first time, and she was flying back to her hometown. And she was flying with this airline, and so um I remember putting out a very firm thread saying, if she faces any problems, especially because we've had a history. If she faces
Mm.
any problems, there will be trouble. And while I was very firm about it, I absolutely did not mean, by trouble, that I would go to their HQ, wherever that was, with a 50
Molotov
cal
cocktail.
and a Molotov cocktail, and burn the building to the ground.
Yeah, yeah.
And neither did I mean, by trouble, that I would send out friends, or people who were working for me, if I could hire them ever, um, in a covert mission to assassinate top. And I also didn't mean that I would station people at airports physically, or otherwise blocking the path of these flights taking off.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah. Mm, I would want to add a few thoughts to that, to a point and a question actually for you.
uh-huh.
So, first the point, which is that also don't kind of party don't let certain kind of stereotypes take hold of you. And part B, if you see sometimes what happens is people see, for example, some discriminatory attitudes among a protected group towards another protected group, and
Yeah.
they say that I this group is experiencing so much discrimination that I hesitate to call it out because of that. Um, do not pursue that path. Wherever you find discrimination, in whatever form or shape, just call it out. And I think the best example of like part both that relates to both part A and part B is this thing relating to blind people, which is, and the part A is that um people some people, and honestly I don't know how they think this, believe in some people in the West believe that blind people cannot be racist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just because you
No.
see color doesn't mean that you can't can't be racist, or just and or to use a more familiar example to many of our viewers, just because you are uh, a woman doesn't mean that you love that you are a supporter of trans rights. Just look at J.K. Rowling as an example.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and the part B that like I personally know of this one case where a friend of mine told me of how in a Scottish, a very rural part of Scotland, encountered they encountered a blind person lived who had lived in a metropolitan city for a while, and who from certain specific experiences of their own seem to think that um well I won't I will there is no point not being blunt here, but who seem to think because of their experiences that Asians and blacks are more likely to be ableist than whites.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and my friend was a bit at first a bit thingy to call it out, because she was like, it's just this person has faced quite a lot of difficulties in their own life, so I don't they basically she was saying that I at first felt that they have some sort of a license to be a little bitter against somebody else, but that is not at all the case. And I have like personally encountered this myself and called it out myself. I won't mention names or organizations here, but if the people in question who were involved in this incident are listening to this, they will know who they are. I met because of some material that emotionally triggered me, which related to circumstances around my around some eye operations that I took at the age of 4, that was coming up in one of my law modules this year. I took mental health support from my university's counseling service, and when telling a specific blind person from India, which for non-Indians, by the way, is not at all a nice country to talk about mental health in.
Oh,
Um, I
absolutely.
was, I was called by another blind person in India whom I told about this, a quote unquote black Englishman. Um,
Yeah, I remember this one.
and yes, you remember this one. And that for any people who are unfamiliar with the kind of uh, obviously it sounds an unpleasant phrase, it sounds like an unpleasant phrase and potentially discriminatory, but for those unaware of the historical thing, it has very problematic historical connotations in India, because a former viceroy of India during the East India Company period, before the British Crown took over, called Lord Thomas Babington Macaulay, said that he would create a quote unquote class of interpreters who were a class of people who would act as quote unquote interpreters between us and the governed, as in Indian, the mass of the Indian people, who would be in quotes English in moral and taste and Indian in blood and color. This quote unquote class of interpreters, as a form of shorthand, were subsequently came to be known as Black Englishmen,
Yes.
because they were predominantly male, and they were made to, in some cases made to, and in some cases very voluntarily absorbed English habits and various things. Um, but
And
anyway, so
might I add that
yeah,
that is
of
absolutely not something you want to say to anyone,
anyone,
especially
exactly,
in, yeah, especially
exactly.
someone from India or someone of color.
Yes, exactly. And yes, and the thing is that I was called this because in India, a lot of people, because of the very negative environment surrounding mental health, a lot of people choose to or are forced to brush their problems under the carpet, or try to live with them as best they can, rather than seeking support. Seeking support is very stigmatized and is seen as a Western thing. And oh, by the way, blindness advocacy in a lot of things is seen as a Western concept, which it is
Yes,
not. Just to
it is
remember,
not. Yeah.
it's not. anyone can do it in any part of the world. It's not like someone called. It's not like people with names such as Julian or Pamela have a monopoly over it. Anyone can do it.
Absolutely not.
So
I think
yeah,
a very good example here is even though this one has quirks, Rahul Bajaj's mission access is actually quite a good
mission
example here.
accessibility. Yes.
Sorry, mission accessibility. Yeah, apologies. Um, i- Rahul Bajaj himself lives in India, and he is actually living proof that advocacy, while made out to be a Western concept, is absolutely not.
Yeah. But yeah, my question for you on your earlier point about moral values was this. Um, what would you do in a situation, for example, where people advocating for in were saying that were claiming to advocate for inclusion in circumstance in relation to a situation or another phenomenon or practice which you find problematic, to kind of make that question specific. You and I both know, I think we are both well enough aware, and our viewers should also be, as well read people generally, should also be well enough aware of the problems that gun culture has caused in the United States.
Oh
Um,
gods, yeah.
what would you think of the sort of people who, for example, the New Jersey blind man who took a case to the Supreme Court for his right to have guns as a blind person?
Huh. Now, this is an interesting one because the gun culture problem, um, while I personally and I see a million problems with the way it's handled currently. And that is absolutely a discussion that I could go on for another day for hours and hours on.
We could both go
Um,
on. Yeah.
oh, absolutely. The unfortunate reality is that that is not the opinion that's shared by everyone. And so this is where it really becomes sort of a gray area.
And more
And
importantly, it's not an opinion shared by the writers of the American Constitution who wrote it in
nope,
1789.
it is not even the opinion shared by the current government,
Yeah.
not completely, at least. And
Yeah.
so
Anyway.
I think this is where the gray areas of advocacy and morals start to show, because while in this case technically this blind man from New Jersey isn't wrong,
Yes.
um, it all depends on his motives to have a gun. The other concern that I have is actually a logistical concern, and I do not say this sounding able, or trying to sound ableist or anything. It's
Yes.
just that there is a logistical problem with someone who cannot see or look down the barrel of a gun to see where it's pointing. Um, and owning something that could effectively end a life or destroy, or cause irreparable damage to
Damage.
something within a fraction of a second. I think, and this is actually a problem that can occur, because it's not just actually even looking down the barrel. It's even the problem of guns have a safety lock on the trigger. What if and the problem is that the safety lock has a dot on it that goes red when it's unlocked, I believe. I have read about the way, at least this is the case on Berettas. Um, and Berettas, by the way, for those unaware, are handguns that are
Yeah.
usually used, that are actually one of the most common to find in store. They do not always kill unless shot at a very specific point in the heart, but they can often cause irreparable damage to arteries and veins and stuff. So, not something you want to shoot at someone for using. So, what if someone owns a Beretta where the switch doesn't actually depress inwards or has any sort of physical way of knowing if the safety for the trigger is on or off? Well, the only way to test it is to pull the trigger, and that is the last thing you want to do.
Yeah.
Another example I want to take personally is paintball. This is a very small and very downscaled example, but I was playing paintball the other day, or trying to at least, with my family, and I was clueless. Like, even though I could hear someone in the field, I could never aim at that person. So, using auditory skills is not useful for a gun. And unlike with a paintball gun where you won't kill someone, you'd probably just hit their armor and cause them to be splattered with paint or cause some light pain. Um, if it sort of hits the thigh or the side of the head. With a gun, if you hit the side of someone's head, that's it. That person's not waking up.
Yeah.
So there is at least, you really got to understand if this is a logistical issue that we're talking about, and if it's a moral issue, because owning a gun technically may not actually be that big of a moral issue. But in this case, even if this gentleman's motives are not wrong, or not sort of uh, they're motives that can be completely understood, um, the fallout of it may be accidental death, which will be classified by the Supreme Court as murder. Um, and it will be just generally something that it's going to be really hard to justify. So I I don't think that this is as much of a moral issue in this specific case as it is a logistical one that we really can't argue against unless gun manufacturers actually make their guns more inclusive, which let's see,
Yeah. No.
let's just say it's very hard to do. So
Yeah. No, because the argument, and I don't have very firm views on this myself, but the argument that a lot of people tout is that uh, um, if this is a constitutional right given in the Second Amendment of the US Constitution, so if it is a right that is given to a US citizen, then it should be a right that every US, like that, that should not arbitrarily be deprived from a US citizen just because of a disability, because they essentially say that a disability like blindness is not the same as a mental condition which may have a higher may cause in some circumstances a higher propensity for committing an offense. Um,
yes, but
so
yeah.
basically, the argument is that uh, okay, fine. If you want to have gun control, don't have proper gun control. Don't don't have don't have an ableist form of gun control that takes away the right from some US citizens who do not pose an active danger to the public, or who may not pose an active danger to the public, while uh, um, while so that I think is sort of the argument there.
Yes,
But
except that they
I
they do sort of pose an active danger to the public. Consider this: someone's trying to check the if the safety lock on their trigger is on, or if their gun is loaded. You probably don't want to stick your fingers inside the barrel of a gun to feel if you have bullets, because let's face it, you might not have fingers left when you withdraw them. Um,
There's a way
and
to open the gun safely to check for the cartridges, though.
there is a way to open a gun to check, but then how do you check how many rounds are inside a cartridge?
Yeah, no, that is
Um,
difficult.
exactly. Or, as I said, the safety lock. Most guns don't have a switch. It's a button that you press and it
Uh,
doesn't deep. It's not like
the
one of those.
correct the
Yeah.
correct term I just remembered is safety catch,
Oh,
technically.
thank you.
In
Yes, the
case
safety
in case
catch.
anyone from the National Rifle Association is watching, we yeah.
The safety catch is not a button that depresses inward to let you know that the safety is on or off. um, and You probably won't remember in many cases. There are times when you may forget if the safety catch is uh, on or not, not enabled. And the only way to check is to press the trigger, except let's just say that that is not something you want to do in the public. Also, who is to be held accountable for then if someone accidentally causes any sort of damage because of a gun, because they cannot look down the barrel or confirm if there are rounds in the gun or what have you? um, is the person who shot the gun unintentionally uh, to be held accountable, or is it actually someone else? Because there is a moral issue there, because you can't really then blame the person who fired the gun, because they didn't do it on purpose.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, this is, I think, yeah, this, I think I generally agree with what you're saying, but this is a relatively easy kind of issue because there is a
Exactly.
question of possibility here versus it just being a moral issue. But there is another type of situation which is a pure, which in many ways can be classified as a purely moral one rather than bringing up any kind of questions of possibility. So, um, as you know, there are some countries where where after completing school, if you are a citizen of that country, you have to do military service or some
Korea,
form of
South Korea.
national.
Yeah.
Yeah. The countries that I know of are South Korea, Singapore, and Israel. And
Yes.
it's on Israel that we'll be focusing because, again, of Avraham Rabby. After returning from his work in the US diplomatic service, one of the things that he really advocated for in numerous letters to the editor and articles in the Jerusalem Post, which is an English language Israeli newspaper, was for disabled people to also be made to do compulsory military service like their non-disabled Israeli counterparts. He, in fact, writes in a Jerusalem Post article about how before going to Oxford, he had tried to apply. He was, of course, educated at the Worcester School for Blind Boys in England, and he talks about how he tried to apply with the Israeli embassy in London to do military service, but was refused. The specific thing, like, obviously, there is. Just like how we were talking about the practicalities of a gun, you can't. You're almost asking for something terrible to happen if you put a blind person into a combat role. Uh,
Yeah.
but what Rabbi was talking about is that there are plenty of non-combat roles, and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces policy is that disabled people have sort of an automatic exemption as long as you can prove your disability from national service. But if you really insist on wanting to serve, then you can be assigned to those non-combat roles. But that policy is based on voluntary enlistment. They won't make you enlist like how they'll make a non-disabled Israeli enlist. And effectively, Rabbi's argument is that for disabled Israelis to be included into that society, as long as they are found to be at least, he uses a Hebrew term whose exact meaning sort of escapes me now, who are found to be what he calls kashir, which I believe is mostly fit to serve, rather than shirim, which is fully fit to serve. They should be made to kind of serve in at least those kind of non-combat roles, and not, it shouldn't depend on an individual disabled person's sense of patriotism. Um, Now, this obviously brings up a set of moral issues, because on the one hand, there are very complex arguments in favor of and against military service, and on
Yep.
the other, in a letter to the Jerusalem Post, Rabbi specifically said, quote unquote, given the dangers Israel faces at present, uh, um, uh, disabled Israelis should not have any sort of embargo on participating in some form of military service. Now, the thing is that if you're a Palestinian hearing that, or if you are a lot of people, well, I'm again not prescribing my own views here, but if you are many human rights organizations hearing that, or an international law expert hearing that, you could argue that Israel has non-military ways of solving some of these problems that um, it's facing by introducing more rights for the Palestinians, getting a two-state solution, and all the rest of it, which we
Yeah.
don't need to go into. Now, when people bring the kind of from what Rabbi is saying, it is clear that he seems to have a slightly conservative view on this question, and doesn't think that and thinks that it may not be possible to resolve these problems in a non-military way. But when the kind of top uh, the concepts of disability inclusion and advocacy are applied to such an issue, would you personally go in for such advocacy, or would you distance yourself from it, and why or why not?
Huh. Now, I would go in for such advocacy, and my main reason for this is, even though this does include a conservative view, um, I do agree with the logistics of Ravi's ideas to actually to quite a large extent. I mean, unless you're someone who um, has a level of a mental disability or a sort of physical disability that I forget the one that you told me about a long time ago, that there was a
Oh,
certain gentleman who couldn't really go to work.
yeah, yeah, no, no, I was, yeah, just to quickly give our viewers the context, as part
Yes.
of my involvement with my university's law clinic, I work on I've had a chance to look at cases of welfare benefits, of applications for welfare benefits for disabled people and people in other circumstances. And there is this particular welfare benefit in England called the Personal Independence Payment, or PIP, which is money that is basically given to help disabled people with their by the state to help disabled people with their extra expenses. And there was this case of actually it was a woman, not a man,
Oh,
who
apologies. Yeah.
no worries, uh who had a problem of incontinence, as in she needed to use the washroom facilities several times a day, and often several times in a number of hours, to 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 do the bigger toilet job.
Yep.
um and so and she found it, and her bowel movement systems meant that she found it hard to control, and to not have it happen, and soil her in a place, if she couldn't get to a washroom. So and there were lots of other complications which we don't need to go into, but
Yeah.
effectively what happened is that the uh, despite this very severe level of a disability, the DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, which is the government department in charge of PIP, did not give her what is called the advanced rate of PIP. So if you get so based on a on a elaborate criteria system, as in answers to several questions about your life and what you can and can't do. They give you a score of points. So if you get 8 points or below, you get, no, sorry, if you get 8 points, you get the standard rate of PIP, which is a lower amount of money. Whereas if you
Yeah.
get 12 points or higher, you get the advanced rate. Now, the DWP did give her the standard rate, but not the advanced rate, which I would say ideally they should have given her, and which the first year tribunal did find that she should get. But anyway, you were saying about that case.
Right. So in that case, continence as it's called, that woman would actually find it difficult to work in any sort of non-combat scenario because anything to do with the military requires quick action. And when something like this happens, and when she has to go to relieve herself, for example, it might actually intrude in any sort of military action. So that might be a complicated case to argue. But for many situations, such as uh, people who have varying levels of visual impairment, or people who are,
Even people like us, for example.
yes, absolutely, who cannot see at all, or people who are bound to a wheelchair because of any sort of a motor disability, can absolutely work in a non-combat scenario. And I think in that case, it does make sense as an inclusive, as an inclusive um, measure to to um, to require military service for people who are fit to attend it in any scenario, even if it's non-combat. I've said in many cases that inclusion doesn't only include benefits that people get, but also the stresses. Like personally, if you were to ask me at school, the one thing I like most about my school is that they don't exempt me from a test just because they might think that it might be stressful for me. Um, in some cases, they will make sure that I have to go through the same levels of preparation that anyone else does while
Yeah.
writing an exam, for example. So I think that in that case, it's something that in a case where someone can actually, in any capacity, serve in the military, I think that Rabi's argument is justified. Maybe not to the level that he states that in its current state the country needs it. Um, and in that case, I may not really agree with that particular point, but I do agree from an inclusive standpoint that it does make sense. And so if I was asked, I would advocate for it, but I would advocate with the caveat that there are people who cannot, that who obviously cannot serve, who have either a myriad of disabilities that really holds them down from being practically able to work, or who have something like incontinence where it actually is an understandable issue to be able to do any sort of reasonable work um, without something well without something terrible happening.
Yeah. No, and I think the biggest caveat we should add to this is, uh, we do not want this part of our discussion to be taken out of context and say,
Oh,
and
not
for
at all.
people to say that, these people are, in favor of military conscription or whatever.
Not at all.
There we I think both of us agree that military conscription in general is not the best idea.
No,
Um,
absolutely
but
not.
but what we are saying is that if you have military conscription, don't just randomly exclude just because a person has a disability. That's all.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And yeah, I think we should move towards our final point, which is
Yes.
which I would combine two things into it. First is kind of being pragmatic, and second is on occasion to be willing to compromise, um, even if you can't always have the best. solution possible. And this is my this is where we return, Pranav, to your Hearthstone example, because
Yes.
you were saying that we had left the Hearthstone story at the point where Blizzard had said that had promised to embed accessibility into its future designs, but
Yes.
we had I believe there was another part of the story which went along the lines of they would take a certain
Yes.
amount of time to do
They would
it.
take a certain amount of time, and the thing is, we understood that because we realized that in its current state, even looking at Hearthstone as a project, it, as I said, it has around 20 million active users. It's 8 years old. The code base is, I know this from decompiling the code, which Blizzard knows I've done, by the way, is
Right.
hundreds of thousands of lines long. um, and Blizzard is as big of a company as they are. They also have been going through moral issues recently, and so let's just say that not a lot of people outside like our community, where we actually want to help Blizzard make this game accessible, not a lot of people want to work with Blizzard currently. um, and for a myriad of reasons, including but not limited to sexual assault.
So, sorry,
Yes.
I believe your internet was cutting out a bit.
Oh, whoops.
You
Okay.
said moral issues.
Yes, I said, so the thing is, Blizzard has had a lot of moral issues, which has made quite a few people uncomfortable to work with them. And these include, but are not limited to things, charges of allegations of sexual assault
Oh my
and
God.
underpayment of workers, employees, pardon me, and so on and so forth. So it would obviously, and even just considering the logistics of it, it would take time, and that's one thing that we actually did understand. We were just happy that Blizzard was uh, taking the initiative when many companies weren't. And I think that's, as you mentioned, Abhishek, I think that's really important to know. At times, even when someone does promise to address what you advocated for, it may not happen immediately. It may require some other work on your part, or it may have some other requirements which are completely logical, and it is important to understand them. But also it's important to sort of gauge when in some cases when people are doing such things just to rid you of the advocacy project that you're trying to do, and it's important to counter that. A very good example of the latter is actually, Abhishek. I hope you won't mind me quoting this
Of
part of your
course.
conversation. Um, is the airline that you had a conversation, the airline that we kept mentioning and referencing, which, by the way, if we haven't mentioned already, you can watch to know the entire story. You can go back to our very first Blind Life Talks video, which covers this in absolutely
A wealth of detail.
excellent. Yes. And so um one of the parts of your conversation, if I'm not wrong, was them telling you that they would that to contact them a few days in advance
Yes.
of going on a trip, and that is not,
Yes.
any sort of logistical
Valid
problem.
solution.
Yes. And that is also not any sort of a solution, so in that case you really counter. Also, these airlines have been known to give people like me and another friend of mine who is an advocate, give us, because we're sort of well known and we have a history with these airlines, give us preferential treatment, so to speak, over someone who's probably not known and someone who's new to them. If I was, say, to send a random visually impaired person in, I would have my doubts that these airlines would treat them well. um, and and that is not considered by in any means as proper solution either. And well, it's not really considered as a solution at all. So those cases are where you really get back at someone, or in some cases where they tell you that they're going to take a certain amount of time and then they never revert back, which has happened, by the way,
Yeah.
just to shush a certain movement. uh, uh, the number of times where someone says that they're gonna fix accessibility problems, and then never do anything about it, is probably more than the number of times that accessibility problems have been fixed. So those are the cases where you get back and you make sure that something is seen through. Even in the case of Blizzard, right, the one thing that we're doing, even though we're not trying to put Blizzard under any pressure or trying to call them out for the fact that they're going to take months, which is obviously not a good thing to do. um, we make sure that we're keeping tabs on the project, and we make
Yes.
sure that we're getting regular updates from Blizzard, understanding where the project is. And I think that's the best way to go about a situation, pragmatically, actually. When you when someone asks for a certain amount of time to, or a certain amount of resources or what have you, to cover the needs, to sort of fulfill the needs that you outlined when you started advocating.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, there is a slight difference between being especially when it comes to things relating to commercial services. There's a difference between being an advocate and being a difficult customer.
Yes.
Um so
Don't be
yeah.
the latter.
Yeah, no, you may have to incorporate certain elements of the latter to be the
Oh
former,
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, yes.
which actually brings me to a postscript to two of the points that I earlier mentioned. One of those being that don't distance yourself from other advocacy movements, and the other being to um, kind of be aware of the contextual uh, background and of various other things, like in the Jonathan Pollard example that I gave. And this point is that to kind of learn from other people and to learn from like other advocacy movements.
Yes.
Not so, for example, in my negotiation, let's for courtesy's sake call them negotiations with this airline. um I mentioned that I earlier mentioned that I had received an email in which they called my experience of ableism and quote unquote inconvenience. Now, if I had not if I had not known the vocabulary of gaslighting, I would not have had the kind of tools to express how what an injustice that form of words was, that it was an inconvenience. Um, and so yeah, like, and where did I learn about the vocabulary of gaslighting? I learned about it from a person whom some people in Britain regard as very controversial, a family law barrister, who is a type of lawyer who goes and speaks in court, called Dr. Charlotte Proudman, um, who's campaigning against um, uh, uh, um, f- uh, feminine genital mutilation and various other forms of domestic abuse, has won quite a lot of awards, and because of whose work the term gaslighting was officially made a legal term in the family courts of England and Wales to describe a situation where an abuser effectively tries to make their victim believe that they are not being abused.
Yeah.
So if I had not known of Dr. Charlotte Proudman, and if I hadn't done the intellectual legwork of reading into her work and seeing the sort of cases she fought and reading the judgments in those cases and engaging with her critiques on it of those judgments, I would not have been able to translate that into the disability context to explain to express the level of injustice that it was. And even in our first Blind Life Talks video, I gave the example for any viewers who didn't understand why an experience of ableism could not be called an inconvenience. I gave the racial example of how if you were kind of on a flight in the US, and you asked for something and you heard a right wing attendant call you the N word behind your back, you would not exactly consider that to be an inconvenience. So
Yeah.
if I had not thanks to a very good high school English teacher of mine who taught me for 3 out of my 4 years of high school, uh, I the concept of politics being relevant to me as a blind person was introduced to me. And so because I studied, she taught us Western texts about critical race theory and racial justice and various other things. I was able to translate it into these contexts and help other people understand it, because advocacy slash activism is as much about spreading awareness and helping other people understand your problems as it is about tackling those problems and trying to ensure that they go away.
In some cases, the former leads to the latter, right? So,
Exactly.
um, that's actually
Yeah.
a very important um, that's a very important point there. And in fact, it's not just others, it's even important to go back once a problem has either been solved or not been solved or what have you, to go back, look at your own advocacy journey through that problem, and try to do an analysis of it, even if it's probably a loosely based one, to understand what worked and what didn't, because you can then incorporate that information in the next time you need to advocate for something.
Yeah, I
So,
think that I don't know if you have any other points to add, but I think if we go much further, we will be speaking for the next 3 days because we'll need
oh,
to get into some
absolutely.
very granular specifics
Yes. No, I
otherwise.
think
Yeah.
I think that does cover what we intended to quite well. However, as we always do, we're completely open to questions, opinions, suggestions, or what have you, in the comments on Twitter, LinkedIn, or email or WhatsApp. And as we always do, I'm gonna be linking. Uh, I'm going to be giving out contact information for both of us in the description of this video. And oh, by the way, do check the descriptions. By the way, for these, they're pretty lengthy, and there's a lot of stuff we link to
Lots
that
of
you might really
information.
find lots and lots of information. So you might really find that useful. And we'd like to hear your thoughts though about all of this. And if you have any ideas about advocacy, as I alluded to in as I said in the beginning of this video, if you have anything that we missed, maybe an experience that others could learn from, or you want to ask us anything or what have you, uh, please do reach out. We would love to hear from you all.
Yeah, indeed.
And we are
Sure.
always open, especially, even if it's for a conversation like this on a call or something. We're always open to having that with anyone. And something I haven't really mentioned, and you can disagree with this if you want to, but I just had in mind, normally Blind Life Talks is a series that we usually make based on experiences and stuff that we have. This one was not based on one specific experience but a myriad of experiences. um, and funny thing is, Blind Life Talks is a series that is meant to advocate, above, well, most things. It's meant to advocate and really have a discussion and spread awareness. And so if you have an idea for a Blind Life Talks that you want
Video.
us, yeah, you want us to make, um we would certainly be, I'm speaking for both of us, we would certainly be completely open to taking that in as well. It may not be our own experience, but we would be completely open. I realize that the name Blind Life Talks is a little more, it bends a little more towards the visually impaired community, and that's mainly just because both of us,
Are
being part
visually
of that.
impaired.
Exactly. And so the best angle that we can take, ironically, is ironic because we're visually impaired and we're taking angles at this. But the best angle that we can, the best, we really get to witness this community above others because we're really part of it. Now that's not to say that we don't like to keep tabs on any other protected characteristic, or we're saying that we're undermining them. But it's just that we don't have as much experience with them as we do with the visually impaired community being part of it ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I will also say that in addition to this, as I said at the beginning, this video is not intended to be a kind of comprehensive guide to
Yeah,
self-advocacy
no
or
crash course here.
advocacy. Yeah, this is not a crash course. Or yeah, so this is there is a lot more that should be added to this, and we can't add it in one video. We'd have to make a whole series of videos if we were to do a crash course on advocacy. But I will say that if you want to know like where I'm coming from and things like that, um the this is the sort of the controversial part of the video, but uh the person who should have been responsible for helping me learn these things, and the professional who fell into the category of people who usually are responsible for helping blind children learn these things, did not teach this to me.
Yes.
Um, and I don't know if your experience was different, Ranav, but what
No,
happened
mine
for
was
me,
similar.
yeah, but what happened for me is that I was partially self-taught, and but only partially, and my English teacher whom I mentioned earlier, without realizing, filled in the largest majority of the gap which was left by the the teacher who was for me the closest equivalent of a British QTVI or qualified teacher
Ah,
for the visually impaired. So I will say that the so if there are on the one hand any blindness professionals such as QTVIs who are watching this and who may have additional points to the ones that we have covered, please let us know so that we can maybe make a follow-up video to summarize those points. Um,
absolutely.
and if there are if there are people like my if there are people like my English teacher who have students who were like me when my English teacher started teaching me, as in having very serious confidence issues. Uh, we hope that this video may be helpful to you in helping your students or your kids or your charges or whatever you like to call them, um, become better advocates. Because
Yes.
honestly, my English teacher needed a lot more help than she was given. She had almost zero access to any kind of resources to help me learn it, and purely did it out of the ideas coming from her own head. And uh, obviously some blindness professionals, or many of them not teaching this, is a huge problem. But a
It is.
problem which we can fix is we non-blindness related professionals such as my English teacher who are working with blind students and who are concerned about this. We hope that this may be one way of helping to alleviate your concern by making this task of teaching blind kids self or any form of disabled kids self advocacy and advocacy more generally a bit easier.
The final thing that I would like to mention here is a caveat that these are all based on only our own experiences. And as
Yes.
I've mentioned quite a few times during the video, um, others may differ. And if you don't, this is not by any means the only way to advocate. Um, if you have a different way, by all means, you can, if you feel that that's more comfortable for you, you can continue following that by all means. Because as we said earlier, the definition of advocacy to everyone is probably something different. It just so happens that Abhishek and I after, well, probably as a result of working quite extensively, especially over the past year, with each other through multiple advocacy projects that have resulted in, what is this, the fifth Blind Life Talks video, um,
Yes.
that we share an almost identical definition to the word.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
That
to conclude, I would just say, good luck with your advocacy, and with your both with your learning, teaching, and application of it. And in the name of some of the greatest advocates, of at least of various communities, including Scott LeBar, Jeremy Brown, Avraham Rabby, and of course, people like Gandhiji or Dr. King, I think
Yeah,
we should make a resolution to be better advocates in 2023. And we hope that if this
absolutely.
is your resolution to, this video may assist you in fulfilling it.
Absolutely. That concludes another successful, well, from the recording point of view at least, Blind Life Talks video. And
And
have a
probably our last of 2022.
yes, most probably our last of 2022. So I would like to wish everyone, if you're watching this in 2023, a very happy new year. Enjoy the probably like 2 days of 2022 left as of the uploading, because we hope to get this out. We're recording this 29th evening Indian Standard Time, and what, 29th afternoon
Afternoon British time.
British time. And I hope to get this out by 29th night Indian Standard Time or 30th
Yeah,
morning. So enjoy the last day or two of 2022. And we'll see you in the next year.
in the next one. Yeah.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.
Now I have to figure out where to stop this. Wait, how do I stop this? Oh, jeez. Hold on a second. I have to figure out how to stop this.
Don't edit this part out because this is practical advocacy. You're publicly complaining about the
Yeah.
accessibility issues with Teams.
Yes. Okay. Stop recording. This did not show in the more button in the more button in Microsoft Teams.
Shit.
Microsoft, if you're watching this, fix it
Now.
now. Now I can stop the recording. Bye bye. Really? It's gonna ask me to stop? Jeez. Fine.